And we are recording. Gerry.
Okay, we're up.
Good morning.
Good morning.
If you would be so kind as to say your name as you want it to be recorded for the purposes of the interview.
Yeah, Gerry Phelan.
Okay, excellent. Well, let's begin. Can you tell me about the community that you grew up in?
Yes, I think I can. I grew up in the community. I'm living right now in the middle of that community. I was born and raised 2 blocks to the east of here, Gilpin Street. My parents had moved in there just before my birth, and so that's the home I knew. I went to school here at Steele Elementary School for kindergarten and first grade. And then second grade, I left and went down about a half a mile west of here is St. Francis de Sales. And the church and the school and a high school, elementary and a high school, are part of the Catholic community. There's various, I don't know if you know anything much about the Catholic Church's organization, but they have parishes, and every parish has its limits, and we were in St. Francis Parish, but just east of us is St. Vincent's Parish, where Adele went to school. St. John's Parish is over on 6th Avenue, but we went to St. Francis de Sales. So I grew up in a very Catholic community. All of my family were Catholic. I was the 4th born, and so brothers and sisters all had gone to Catholic schools. We were taught by the nuns from 2nd grade on. And then I went to Regis High School, which was at that time in North Denver, taught by the Jesuit priests. So I came up very much in a Catholic community. I learned how to say the Latin in order to be an altar boy. And all of the people that I looked up to and listened to and interacted with were all part of the Catholic community. I thought everybody was Catholic and Irish. I found out going along that wasn't true. There was a Jewish boy that lived across the street from us, so
And he wasn't Irish.
And he wasn't Irish either. He and his family had immigrated here from Holland right after the war, so I did know that there was a larger world. South High School was where all the Protestants went, and Byers Junior High down here, So I grew up really knowing about other groups, but very much part of one group. And that was very influential in my setting my goals and my priorities and so forth. So I went to Regis High School. After graduating from Regis, I spent 1 year at St. Norbert's College in De Pere, Wisconsin, and then decided to go into the seminary to study to be a priest. It seemed at the time it's something I'd thought about, and it was really at that time, before all the scandals have come about that has kind of ruined the reputation of the church. At that time it was like being a lawyer or an engineer or a priest was kind of a high-ranking thing within the community, not so highly ranked by other people outside of the community, maybe, sure. But it was kind of a big thing. So I spent 3 years at St. Thomas Seminary, which is out here in South Denver on Steele Street, and then they picked me to go and study in Rome. So I went over and studied in Rome for 2 years, and then returned here and was ordained a Catholic priest and said my first Mass in my church just down here blocks away, and was, kind of that was a high point for family, and it was, very much an integrated part of being thought well of in our community. So it was a happy time. Then I served for 5 years as a priest in the parish at Blessed Sacrament Parish over at Montview Boulevard and Elm Street, and was very involved. At that time, I was very involved in trying to reach out to other communities. So I knew well the Montview Presbyterian Church people and the Episcopalian Father, I'm blanking on his name right now, but anyway, that was 50 some years ago. We got together with the different groups. So that's the community I came up in, and that's the influence that was under, that got me that far.
Well, you managed to very succinctly touch on a bunch of the questions we usually ask.
Okay.
So if you don't mind, I'm going to rewind things a little bit. So you grew up rather thoroughly Catholic, let's say.
Very much so.
Did you have friends who weren't Catholic?
Yes, all the kids in the block, or not all of them, but some of them weren't Catholic, and we were good friends and played football and other sports together, and there were a lot of friends that weren't Catholic.
Okay. And your family was arguably quite religious?
Yes, they all were. They all were. My brothers all went through the parochial school system, so...
I ask this just because there are people I've spoken to who are Catholic, who their family was religious in the sense that they went to church. It was expected of you that you would go to confessional, but the actual level of sort of theological fervor in the house was essentially zero.
Yeah.
And so I suppose a separate question would be to ask, how thoroughly do you think that the sort of doctrine of the church was like in your house? How much do you think you sort of, it sounds to me like you very much were a believer at the time.
Exactly. I would say my whole family was pretty involved in it. My oldest brother ended up teaching in a Catholic college at Green Bay in De Pere, Wisconsin for 40 years, and they were very much Catholic until he died at the age of 98. My sister worked for the parish and for the Diocese of Denver, and actually was employed as a liturgist for the community of St. Vincent's, and her husband became a deacon. So our family was very Catholic. I mean, really, it was at home and in school, and so I came up in a all Catholic world.
And you didn't have any... And I'm not asking this because I think that this necessarily correlates. That's actually why I'm asking, because there's this sort of belief which is that exists out there amongst various religious communities I've talked to, which is that if somebody leaves, they never believed. And so when you were young, you were very much a believer. I mean, this all made sense to you at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
And it made sense to you enough that actually later you decided to become a priest.
Right.
What would you say led you to wanting to do that? Because, of course, you can be a Catholic, be a believing Catholic, and not decide to join the priesthood.
Right. I don't know. I think my experience of the priests I knew, I didn't see any of the sexual problems that have risen in the church. They kind of really hit me upside the head. I didn't see any of that. I saw people that I really looked up to, both in the Jesuit community at Regis and in the local community here. And it just, it was the kind of thing that I thought, well, this will be a great way to spend your life helping others and doing things for others. And, it just made sense at the time.
So there was a pretty strong, it sounds like there was a pretty strong altruistic motivator.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure that's, as I look back, I really kind of bought into the whole thing of trying to make a difference in the world and,
And help people.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's totally fine. So you went to seminary, you served as a priest for quite some time.
Yes, about 7 years.
Okay. And given that you're sitting in this chair and we're having this interview, at some point something changed.
Right.
Or perhaps across a period of time, because a lot of people that I've interviewed already said I didn't have any kind of moment of insight where I realized that something had changed.
Right.
It was just a continuum. What period or what series of events or particular thing, what do you feel like potentially sort of led you to consider other possibilities in terms of your worldview?
Well, as I look back, I think the simplest way to explain it is gradually got to be a kind of a cognitive dissonance in my life, that I was lucky to have two really good professors as I went through the system, and that's out of maybe 50 that, you know, I look back on, that all the classes you've taken and everything, but there were two of them that were just amazing. And one of them had his doctorate in philosophy from Louvain University, and the other one his doctorate in sacred scripture from the Biblical Institute in Rome. And they were both up-to-date, thoughtful, penetrating. They really made a mark. So as I was being trained and going through that process, I was lucky to have some really open-minded, brilliant minds, and they made an impression on me and got me thinking both on the philosophical levels as well as the assumptions you make about the Bible and the sacred scriptures. So those two professors kind of opened my mind and made me more aware of questions. And so it began. And then teaching, I think, was also another critical thing, because a lot of the kids ask really good questions. And you've got to be able to explain it to them and make it sound reasonable. And there are some things that were quite simple to handle, and other questions that you would say, yeah, I don't know about this. One of them that came up was, at that time, that was back in 1965, 6, 7, was the question of birth control. And in the Catholic community, the church dogma was very strict that you're just not allowed to do that and so forth. It's verboten, and it can send you to hell and all this. So I began rethinking all kinds of things. That didn't make any sense to me at all, and seemed absolutely an opposite of what made sense to me. There are a lot of other issues, though. The whole dogmatic world that the Catholic Church has developed over the centuries, and the Bible is the Word of God, and I'm thinking, I've got to really rethink this. And it would have been easier if I had not been a priest and having to teach and answer the questions, and you know, I could have just said, well, don't worry about it, just go to church, and maybe that will be a good thing to do in your life, and skip the rest. And you couldn't do that, because you had to face it day in and day out and teach it. And I thought, I just can't do this anymore. As I say, it was kind of a cognitive dissonance. It just wasn't making sense. So I ended up applying for and receiving a 1-year sabbatical kind of thing. And the more I...
From teaching?
From the priesthood.
That's a thing?
Yeah, I said, I'm going to take a year off and kind of review the situation.
I didn't know that was something that existed at all.
Yeah, at that time we could do it. They stopped doing it. That was under... when Pope John the 23rd, no, I'm thinking of John the 23rd, Pope John Paul II, he had so many people that were dropping out of the priesthood that they decided not to allow you to have a year off.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
So that put the kibosh on a lot of that. But anyway, and after I'd taken a year, I thought, there's just no way I can go back and preach all of this. And I began to realize too, and I'm trying to think of his name, the guy that did so much in mythology. I read a lot about his views, and
There are a lot of those. Joseph Campbell, maybe?
Joseph Campbell. And I kind of came up, when I look back at the timing in the church, it was, my group was, when I went to Rome, the Vatican Council was just starting. So there was a lot of liberal, forward-thinking, wanting to update, and it was an exciting time to be around. Unfortunately, it didn't last long, because once the conservatives got back into power and the Vatican Council was over with, and all the bishops around the world went home, the Vatican kind of went backwards, and ultimately was against most of the reforms that the Vatican Council had done anyway. But anyway, that was a really exciting time to be, and it was enjoyable to be part of that, opening up of the doors of the church. But when it became obvious, and the main event that occurred to me that kind of was the last straw, was we were all waiting for Pope Paul was going to come out with a statement on birth control. And everybody said, his council of advisors were all saying, we've got to open this up because this is and he didn't. And he came down strongly the birth, and I thought, I can't take this anymore. So that one issue was probably the one issue that struck me as most impossible to try to explain away. But all the other things, when you look back now, I think Joseph Campbell's idea of mythical is correct. The most of the theology of the church is all mythology, and a lot of it was developed over the centuries during the Middle Ages and things like that, and the world of angels and devils and all of this. And I thought, for a while, you can just demythologize it. I mean, with all mythology, there's a basic truth they're trying to present, and so you could just say, you can try to demythologize. Well, by the time I demythologized all the Catholic thing, there wasn't much left, and I thought, I got to get out of here.
Okay. I would like to you mentioned a number of things here, and I want to touch on them in series. So, first off, one of the issues you brought up more than once, actually, was this issue of birth control. What about birth control was a sticking point for you? Meaning, there are other things in Catholicism that, to me, as an outsider, meaning I've never been Catholic. Yeah. I'm Jewish, so we know about the church a little bit because, you have to.
Right.
But when you look back, it's like the idea, for example, of eternal damnation exists in the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That idea, to me, strikes me as really quite problematic mathematically, right? You do something finite and you get an infinite punishment for it.
Mm-hmm.
Just as an example, why birth control?
Well, I think birth control was, the church has always put sexuality out of focus, I think. And birth control is just one element of that. But the people in the parish that you've got 1,000 people that come to Mass every Sunday, and we're supposed to be teaching that this is a mortal sin that can end your chances of salvation if you break this law on birth control. And I thought the world was getting more and more populated. We've got to be going in the other direction. We need to try to slow things down a little bit. We're just going out of control, and it just seemed to me that condemning people to hell because they practice birth control is just obnoxiously out of order.
It's almost Kantian. It's like what you're saying is basically, if you're Catholic and you're a believing Catholic, the whole world ideally should be Catholic. If the whole world buys this and the whole world believes this doctrine about birth control, we'll overpopulate.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I can understand why that on its face could be potentially an issue. And of course, you said there were others. There were other problems. You don't have to go into a ton of detail if you don't want to. What could you name another, let's say, 2 or 3?
Well, I think there's just so much kind of mythical beliefs. The idea of as you mentioned, of hell. It just goes down the line that it just all of a sudden doesn't make much sense anymore. And I don't know if there were any other singular issues that I had, but yeah.
Was this in the light of the idea of a beneficent creator?
Yeah, I don't know though. The whole issue of God, of whether there is a God, I have finally decided that there's no possible way that you can prove the existence of God, but there's also no possible way that you can disprove it. So to me, atheism is kind of a silly position to take as well. I think the truth of the matter is we just damn well don't know. And we don't know how it's all going to work out and why it's all worked out the way it has. And God only knows the world is a mess at this moment with people suffering and dying and being shot. And it's hard to see the role of God at all. I don't, the belief in miracles, for example. Miracles are a big thing in the Bible itself, all the different, the loaves of bread being multiplied and the fish, and well, you can just go through, especially the New Testament. There's some miraculous things in the Old Testament as well.
There's some big ones in the Old Testament, yeah.
But in the working of miracles, it seems almost obscene that God would make all of these laws that are very, very harsh. I mean, we live in a harsh world. I mean, you get sick as a small child and suffer and go through pain and die at the age of, you think, what's all that about? There's just so many things that God stepping in and interfering with that on one occasion or the other seems to me to be ridiculous. Why would he do that?
You're referring to the problem of natural evil.
Yeah, if you're going to set up all the rules, then I think you follow the rules, and that seems to be what happens, because earthquakes hit and 70,000 people die, or a tidal wave comes in and 30,000 people die, and it's like, God's not helping out with this much. If he could do miracles. But anyway, a lot of people believe in miracles, and I don't think so.
Did you believe in them at some point and then stop?
Oh yeah, I think there was a time growing up, and certainly all through high school and even into the seminary. It didn't really start changing until after I was ordained and had to start teaching and had people questioning, and made me reevaluate until I got to the point where I just was too uncomfortable to move on in the role of defending all what I thought was not very easy to defend. So
it sounds to me like one of the things you're describing is that it wasn't so much that the faith was a thing in your life.
A what?
It's not that it was a thing, singular, in your life.
Yeah.
It was the thing. And as a result, because you were constantly being forced to engage with the contradictions,
yeah.
Over time, that chipped away at the base of your belief.
Right.
Sort of. And you described sort of this moment where you sort of go, I'm out. What made you you left the priesthood and then the church, or did you leave the priesthood and the church all at once?
I actually left the priesthood first. No, I think it was pretty much almost all at once. Once I decided to leave the priesthood, I really never went back. It's funny because there's the social element to that. My community of reference, the people I knew, the people I interacted with, all of my friends, they were all still in the church, although a number of them were questioning and certainly understood and accepted my leaving. But I think that that for many it was not a easy thing. It wasn't easy for my family because they were very Catholic. My mother had been a convert, and so but she had been so proud of what I had done, and so on and so forth. So there was at first a little bit of rejection. That my sister tells me the story. I had gone back to the Catholic University in America, where I had been studying for a master's degree in guidance and counseling, because there were so many priests teaching in schools like I was at Manchester. They had me go during the summers back to the Catholic University to work on a degree. So when I decided to leave, I decided, well, I'm only about 15 hours short of my degree, so I'll go back to the Catholic University, which is where I went right after I left, and finish the master's, so that I could have some way to enter the economy, because you make nothing as a priest.
Yeah, you walk out with no savings. Is that true?
With what?
I am of course not Catholic, but one of the things that I am aware of is that the 3 vows that all of the clergy take includes, one of the vows includes poverty, correct?
No, that's not quite right.
That's not quite right. Okay.
Within the divisions of the priesthood in the church, there are orders like the Jesuits, the Dominicans, the Franciscans. They all take the triple vow of chastity, obedience, and what's the other one? Poverty, chastity, and obedience. Mm-hmm. If you're in the local diocese, I didn't join an order. I'm just attached to the Diocese of Denver, and I'll always be just a parish priest in the Diocese of Denver. And so when I went through the seminary, we had to take the vow of chastity before you were ordained, and then the vow of obedience to the bishop, and that's all. You didn't take a vow of poverty.
But you still walk out with almost no savings.
Well, my pay was $75 a month, but they gave me room, board, and library privileges, which meant you could use the resources of the parish, like
even adjusting for inflation. That's not that much.
No.
Okay.
It was embarrassing. I had to
take the vows.
Might as well have taken the vows. But when I came home from Catholic University after I left, I literally had less than $20, my net worth. Luckily, by that time I had paid off my car, so I at least had that. That was it. That and $20, and I needed to get a job.
$20 and a master's in a car.
Yeah, right.
This is a real American story. Okay, so you decided to leave, and you said it was sort of a sweeping process, meaning you sort of exited the priesthood and you exited the church in quick succession.
Yeah, and that's not true of most of the guys that have left. I went into 2 seminaries. I had 30 classmates at St. Thomas, and I had 75 classmates in Rome. And we still get together, and I still, we do a television thing that, what do they call that?
Like a Zoom meeting.
A Zoom meeting with my Rome class about every 3 months. We get together. There's not a lot of us left, but we still get together. But they left. A lot of them left, but certainly not all. Some of them. We still have a bishop that attends the meeting, and anyway, they left for different reasons. A lot of them went into professional work. A lot of them had doctorates because the kids that went to Rome were the best of the best from each diocese, and we had some brilliant kids there. And some of them went on and have done a lot of work, but didn't leave the church. And a lot of them are still very much Catholic and are married, and their children are Catholic. But mine was in a sense unique. I really left everything. Because it was a matter of the faith that they had. I didn't have anymore. So it was really, I don't really represent most of the guys that have left.
Okay. Do you feel, well, you alluded to this earlier, and I don't mean to pry here, and if you don't want to sort of go any further, that's fine. You had mentioned a certain amount of sort of social rejection. Were there other repercussions to you leaving?
No, I don't think a lot. I think in a sense it helped me a little bit. This is 1969 or 70. I was 70 when I first got my job with the Cherry Creek School District. I don't think it hurt getting a job. I think I was sort of an anomaly that they were really interested in, and they thought this is going to be really interesting. We'd like to have someone like this on our faculty, and so I moved fairly quickly into Cherry Creek High School, and I don't think it hurt me that I was seen as. Although Don Go, the superintendent at the time, did mention once in an interview that I hope you're not going to proselytize. And I thought, Don, if you just knew how far away I was from the church, there's no chance that I'm going to be proselytizing. But I said, no, you don't have to worry about that. So.
Okay.
But, I don't feel the world turned against me, although I think most of the Catholics were disappointed, and some of them were very understanding, and nobody said anything much against me.
Do you feel like you had resources on the way out?
Did I have what?
Resources. One of the questions we ask a lot is if people have resources. When people leave religion, there are social costs. In some cases, there are financial costs in some cases. There are ideological or sort of philosophical crises that people get into where it's like you suddenly don't have a safety net you once had to answer certain questions. Now, your case is a bit unique because it sounds to me like you largely reasoned your way out.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like you had somewhere to turn? If you sort of found yourself suddenly without the routine you once had, did you feel like you needed help? Did you have any help?
No, I didn't really feel that I needed that much. I had enough people that understood, and of course Adele and I knew each other because she was on the faculty at the high school that we taught in, and I had her support, and most of my family came around really. Did I tell you the story of my mother saying, my sister said, Gerry's back at the Catholic University and he'll be back here, so we'll need to set the basement bedroom up for him. And my mother said that he's not coming back here. But by the time I got back, she had resolved it, and I didn't know that. My sister told me later that her first reaction was, he isn't coming back here. But I never knew that and didn't feel that rejection, and she was quite loving when I returned. I did stay there for only 2 or 3 months, then I got my own apartment because I had a job. And then
you had $20.
Yeah, right. I had $20 to spend, so Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Anyway.
Well, that's actually very comforting to hear because, of course, you're one of the only clergy we've interviewed for this. And actually, one of the things that I keep seeing so far is that there's almost a U-shaped curve, where if somebody's family was barely considered religious, it's like you went to church every once in a while or something like that. There's not really any repercussions. And then if the family is religious, but not to the point that any of the kids become clergy religious, there are a lot of negative repercussions. And then no one could accuse you of not having given it an honest shot, at the very least.
Yeah. Yeah, right. After 7 years.
You were a priest. I mean,
yeah, right.
It doesn't get much. I mean, the short of climbing rank in the church, there really is there's no further one can go.
Right.
Okay. So
I did have an interesting meeting with the bishop. As I was teaching at the high school, and when issues came up, like the birth control issue and things, I was on the liberal side.
Was this when you were still a priest?
Yeah, when I was still a priest. And so I tried to get not only the other religious groups in the thing to have kind of an ecumenical spirit of getting along with the other clergy, but I also organized these meetings of Catholic priests, other priests that were serving in other parishes, to come over for pizza and beer on a Saturday night, and we would discuss things. We would have a book or something that we'd always discuss. The discussions would go on till midnight, and they had to get up the next morning and say Mass and all that. But we had about a half a dozen of us or so that we gathered together. Well, the bishop heard about this. One of the conservative priests heard that we were going to discuss a book that related to the structure of the church and whether it was a book by Dubé. He was from California, and he was a priest there, and he had written a book about kind of organizing the priests into a union.
Ooh.
And of course, that was a bit of a no-no. So I got this call from the Chancery office saying that the bishop wanted to see me. So I went down, and he lived at that time down on Pearl Street, 777 Pearl Street. There's a big mansion there. It's now a bunch of offices for lawyers. But anyway, he let me cool my heels for about an hour. I was supposed to be there like at 2 o'clock, and so at 3 o'clock or 3:15, I'm still sitting in the... So in he comes, and he was an old German bishop who really gloried in being a bishop, with the bishop's mitre and the rings and all that, So anyway, he kind of, what the hell's going on here? And I can remember I was a little surprised that he used that's a bunch of bullshit, Oh yeah.
Wow.
He was. So what's this? And I said,
very, very sharply against all dramatizations of bishops and priests. Granted, there are power struggles in the Catholic Church, and those have been the subject of much television drama. But nobody ever says, what the hell?
Yeah, right.
Nobody ever says bullshit.
The hell? Anyway.
He said, what is this bullshit?
Yeah, well, that's a bunch of bullshit, he says.
I'm sorry.
Well, arguing that we were just having a discussion, and that we should be up to date. We should keep with what's going on, and this is a book that's people are talking about, so we should be discussing things like this. Well, it's a bunch of yeah. So he was quite unhappy with me, and he had sent me to study for my degree, as I mentioned, in the Catholic University. And as he escorted me to the door, he said, "You're not going anyplace in this diocese, and you're not going back to the university." So he said,
wow.
That's over with.
Were you already thinking that maybe you needed to leave the church at this time?
Yeah.
Or was this just another drop in the bucket?
This was another drop in the bucket.
Okay.
I think it was a little earlier, But I realized that you know, I actually said to him at some point in the conversation that, you know, the younger priests don't know you, Archbishop. Nobody knows what you think or what you say. Or I said, you're kind of like the Wizard of Oz. You're kind of behind the scene and pulling the strings, and nobody knows you. Well, you know, so I got my licks in. I probably was, as I look back on it, I probably was obstreperous, but anyway, I wasn't just sitting around saying yes or no, sir. It was a back and forth discussion, and I got my licks in too. So anyway, after that was over with, about a year later, he called me and said, "We're transferring you to St. Mary's in Littleton." They usually just did that after about 5 or 6 years in one assignment. They wanted you to get a different assignment and so forth. I had been taken away. I wasn't going to Catholic University anymore, so I had my summers free. But when that hit, he was getting old, and he retired, and the new bishop came in, and the new bishop was much more liberal and had read my case. I asked if I could go back and continue studies at Catholic University, and he said, yes, I've read over the thing, and I think I agree that you should do that. So there was kind of a, you know, I didn't get hurt too bad on that. And it was much easier with the new bishop. But anyway, yeah. Did a lot of reading, a lot of thinking, a lot of, you know, probably more than the average Catholic, just because I couldn't just slyly walk away. I had to walk away publicly.
Right, you didn't have a choice.
Yeah. And the fact that I married a nun, you know, that certainly added to the scandal of it all. But my family stuck with me, and still a lot of friends, and, you know, it wasn't bad.
Well, unfortunately, in the interest of time, we're going to have to pause this here. So that was part 1.
Okay.
We're more than halfway through this. There's a few other questions. If you want to answer them really quickly,
I could, yeah, but I'm sure.
That, and then we'll close this, and maybe you and I will have to have a bit of a theological talk at some point, because as an atheist, you said something which I find interesting. So you sort of talked about coming out. You weren't the first person your family had ever interacted with who wasn't Catholic. But were you the first person in the family to ever leave the church?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Did anyone follow you, or is everyone still Catholic?
No, they're all pretty Catholic still. All nieces and nephews, there's a couple of them that I don't think they're much Catholic, but by and large, yeah, their family's still pretty much the Catholic.
Okay.
Except my sisters and brothers have all died now, so it's the next generation.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, as a former member of your community, if you received any advice, was there any best or worst advice about leaving the church?
Best advice? I don't really think I got advice one way or the other. I felt like, anyway, that it was a decision that I was making, and I don't remember having to talk it over deeply with anybody else. I thought, yeah, I don't remember.
Okay. And how is your life different now?
I think there's some good and some bad. The nice thing about being in the church or any group is that you've got a community of like-minded people, and I would not be comfortable at all going back into any of the religious, I thought about it too hard and long, that there's not a chance in the world that I would return to the world. But I miss, especially now that I'm getting old and we don't have family, we don't have children, and so it's just Adele and I, kind of, the two of us, and I kind of miss, that camaraderie with a group that you share values with. But I don't know of any group I could I would want to join that you know. So it's just one of the bad things about. I can see why the Mormons and others stick together so hard, because it's their social world. And for Catholics too, it's a social thing. They're involved in the church things, and it gives them a home. But yeah, I think that's been hard.
Are there any positive sides to it, or not really?
Oh gosh, yeah. I feel so much freer and more able to enjoy the intellectual advancement of where human beings are going and what we're headed, and by not having all that junk that I have to try to defend.
Sure.
So there's a liberating side to it.
Right. You're not married to any given idea.
Right.
Yeah. I can sympathize.
But I also appreciate why people stay in religion, and I wouldn't criticize them for it. I've got a couple of friends that are very religious, and they kind of live their lives referring constantly to God's doing this for me and God's doing that for me. But I would not attack that ever. I think it's such a hardship to get through life and get through death. That anything that helps anybody is fine with me. And I would never bring up an argument to anybody saying, hey, have you really thought about this? I think I went through my thing, and it was my thing, and I don't want to preach it to anybody.
Yeah. Okay. And finally, although you alluded to this earlier, what would you talked about sort of your theological stance. It sounds like you're basically very firmly agnostic.
Yeah.
What would you say your stance is? And I suppose you just answered this. What is your stance on religion? Not your theological stance. Not whether you're, theist and agnostic and atheist. That's not.
Okay. I think that psychology has taught us a lot about human beings in their development. And I think we go through, as you probably have studied in your own background, you go through the different stages of development, the archaic, the magical, the mythic, and move up to the rational and keep going forward. And I think that if you look at the world around us, a lot of people get kind of stuck in the lower levels and don't develop into the more broad kind of views of things. So they live in a smaller world intellectually. I think a lot of people have fears about different things. Some people fear sex, some people fear or don't have ability to risk financially or their lives, and so they have, and a lot of people are fearful intellectually. They just don't want to go there. They've gone as far as they can go, and they're not interested in pushing in the intellectual world. So they end up staying at a fairly primitive level. And I think that's what happens in religion. Religion is at a mythic level, and a lot of people are very comfortable with that, and that's as far as they want to go. They don't want anybody pushing them any farther. And so throughout the world, the more primitive, undeveloped areas tend to stay at the lower level. That's why I think the Catholic Church is the only success it's having now is in Africa and in South America. And Europe has pretty well rejected it. There are not many Catholics left in Europe that care about it.
What you're sort of referring to is that when you get exposed to a very broad range of ideas as opposed to some kind of monoculture,
yeah,
it's very hard to keep defending something that rigid, essentially.
Yeah.
That's a good point, I think, overall. I mean, I don't disagree. I never thought about religion just in terms of staying at the level of myth.
Yeah, I think if you read a lot of people that are in religion, they're still basically approaching the world from a magic plateau. You know, they still think that magic's going to happen to them, and God's going to, like Santa Claus, come and rescue them, and you know that. And I would never tell them that's probably not true. I should say, oh, good. I hope it all works out. But I don't think it will.
Well, on that great hill.
Yeah, right.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. And I will send this to you, and you can clear it. And anything you want, remove, taken out. But you actually, thank you for this, because you did a very phone call. Thank you, Gerry.